And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we have a simple and delicious side dish for you. This is Fiesta vegetables featuring fresh corn and zucchini. Of course, here in Ontario, this is vegetable season, so we've got amazing fresh and delicious corn and zucchini. It's all ripe right now, and we wanted to make some use of that while it's perfectly in season. So here are our ingredients. Starting with some corn. We have some of our homemade pickled poblano peppers, some onion, some zucchini, a little bit of butter, and this is garlic and some of our homemade hot sauce. Now this is made from green Thai bird chilies, and it's very similar to the hot sauce we made earlier in our channel. So we're going to start off by putting a little bit of, this is actually bacon grease. We're going to start off with some bacon grease in our pan. Now if you use a neutral oil like vegetable oil or something like that, you can keep this dish vegetarian. And if you leave out the butter as well, you can keep it vegan. So just some notes for the vegetarians and vegans that may be watching. So we're just going to cut the zucchini into pretty large pieces. We're going to cut them in half. And then just cut them into half moons. Pretty big. We want them to be sizable when they're done. We're going to put a little bit of color on these before we add in all the other vegetables. We want to get a little bit of nice color and flavor on these before we start cooking everything else. The other thing we're going to add right away is the garlic. So we're going to give this a pretty fine dice. Again, it helps to have an extremely sharp knife. All of the amounts are going to be in the description below along with the ingredients. So you can see here we've got a pretty fine dice on the garlic. We're going to make sure that that's pretty small. Small enough that it gets stuck everywhere. And then we're going to move on to putting it in our pan. So you can see our bacon grease has melted. It's all nice and hot right now. So in goes the zucchini. And you do want to try and make sure as much as possible that you've got the zucchini touching the pan, because what we're trying to do to start is get a little bit of color on there. We want to get a little bit of a sear. We want to get some nice color and flavor going on those. Now we had some difficulty with our fridge. You can see some of these are a little softer on the outside. It actually partly froze in the container we had it in. It's still fine. It came out fine. Next, we're going to deal with our corn. So we have our raw cob of corn here. We've taken the husk off. We're just going to cut the niblets off here. We're just going to cut all of the kernels off from the cob. You don't want to cut too deep. You don't want to get chunks of cob in there. You want to make sure that these all come apart pretty well. But also you want to try and get as much of that the juice out of there as well, because that's a lot of flavor. And then we're going to cut up our onions as well. We're just using one large white onion for this, and we're going to cut it pretty chunky, honestly. It's not really, really small pieces. We do want it to be small enough that it's not going to be super oniony, but we also want that flavor in there. Now these aren't going to get a whole lot of color. We're going to leave that for the zucchini. So you can see here there's a little bit of color coming up the side, a little dash of salt here, a little bit of black pepper. These are starting to get a little bit of color on the bottom, and what we're going to do is give them a little seasoning here on the uncooked side. And then we're just going to give it a little toss. And you can see some of that nice sear, some of that nice Maillard reaction, some good color forming on the bottom of those. So now we want some color on the other side. So we're going to let those cook on the other side for a little while. Meanwhile, we're also going to add in our other vegetables. So we're going to put in the corn and onions. And we've added a whole lot of new veggies in there, so we're also just going to add a little dash of salt. Now, we've also added our hot sauce, but not the poblanos yet. Those are going to go in really close to the end. So another dash of salt, a little bit more black pepper. And this is all just going to cook now for a little while. Going to give it a little toss to make sure that everything's well coated. Trying to keep everything you can in the pan, but not always easy or possible. Just want to give it a light little toss to make sure everything's coated in the oil that you're cooking in, as well as distributing that salt and pepper. And then we just want to let that cook for a little while. So we want those onions to soften a little bit. We want the corn to soften and cook. And while we're waiting for that to happen, we're going to cut up the poblano peppers. So these are just some homemade pickled poblanos. We cut them into rings and put them in a salt brine. Very similar to some of the other pickling you've seen us do on this channel. And they're nice. They're a little bit spicy, but not super, super hot. And they add a really nice color to this dish, because otherwise it's a little bit one-note color-wise with the light green of the zucchini and the yellow corn. So that just splash of red really helps. We're also going to toss in our butter. That's just for flavor. Again, that is entirely optional if you want to keep this dish completely vegan or vegetarian. You don't need to add the butter, but we find it adds a really nice richness and gives a nice sort of glossy glaze to all of your vegetables in that dish. So we're just going to toss everything, make sure it's all coming together nicely, everything's well distributed and combined, and we're going to let that butter melt until it's all the way cooked. It has a beautiful color. Aroma's really nice too. Okay, so the butter is now all melted. So we're just going to give this a little taste to make sure the seasoning's right. If it needs a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, this is the time to add it. And if you want some kind of fancy way to display or to serve, a nice little presentation, just take a cookie cutter. you can do it like a fancy restaurant. Take a cookie cutter and just push a little bit of that into the middle of the cookie cutter. And it gives you that kind of slightly vertical presentation that you'll see in some fancy restaurants and some nice restaurants. And you want to make sure that you give everything a little bit of a push down. You want to give it a little bit of a crush in there to make sure that everything kind of interlocks with its neighbor and it maintains its structure. Now, we didn't give it a very deep push, and you can tell when we lift this, we get a little bit of a collapse, but it does still look pretty nice. There it goes. Really a super easy way to fancy up your presentation, though, if you want to add a little bit of interest to it. Just put use your cookie cutters or something as a ring mold. Very, very easy to do. And that's it. That's the whole thing. Really, really simple. Absolutely delicious. This is the time to use those fresh veggies in season. You can add all sorts of different vegetables to this. Tomato also works well in here. And we hope you enjoy it. So if you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.